Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled The Complete Integrated Risk-Based Monitoring Solution, Harnessing the Power of Multiple Technology Systems to Drive RBM and Overall Data Quality Oversight. My name is Andrew Jernan, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and if you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using that chat panel. And at this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode, and please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. And at this point, I would like to thank CluePoints, who helped develop the content for this presentation. CluePoints is a risk-based monitoring and data quality oversight solution that employs unique statistical algorithms to determine the quality, accuracy, and integrity of operational and clinical trial data. By identifying anomalous data and site errors, corrective actions can be taken, ensuring data quality and reduction in overall regulatory submission risk. Now, aligned with guidance from the FDA, EMA, and ICH, CluePoints is deployed to de-risk studies to support traditional on-site monitoring and can be implemented as the engine to drive a risk-based monitoring strategy. And now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's event. Our first speaker, Francois Torsch, holds a Master in Business Administration from the ICH School of Management in Brussels. Over the past 18 years in the pharmaceutical industry, he's held positions as statistical programmer, SAS and Java developer, and IT project leader for companies such as GSK, UCB, and IDDI. During his 10-year tenure with IDDI as an IT specialist, Mr. Torsch assisted in development of the Smart Engine, a patent-pending software solution and the underpinning of CluePoints. Francois has served as CluePoints Chief Executive Officer since the company's inception in 2012. All right, well, our next speaker for today's event, Jim Streeter, is now VP of Life Science Product Strategy at Oracle Health Sciences. He previously held leadership roles at PPD in both operations as the Global Head of Global Clinical Technical Operations and EDC, and recently in IT as Global Head of Systems Development, Business Operations Teams, and eClinical Strategy and Innovation. He has 25 years of data acquisition and analysis experience utilizing computerized systems and has focused on eClinical systems and processes for trials for the past 15 years. His experience includes implementing end-to-end eClinical solutions and processes across all therapeutic areas and all phases of studies. And now it's with my pleasure to hand the presentation and the microphone over to our first speaker for today. That's Francois Torsch. Mr. Torsch, you can begin your presentation when ready.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Well, we presented together with Jim about 9 months ago our vision of RBM, and I think that it's fair to say that since then we've been really working as a team to transform that vision into something concrete. And we thought it was time to share with you that, to give you an update of where we are standing with Oracle in the integration of our two solutions. And I think that vision is still based on the regulations, guidances. We've been talking about the FDA guidance for a number of years now. More recently, we've seen the ICH E6 addendum, which goes, I think, it's perfectly in line with what the FDA guidance is telling us. And I will be extending that talk a little bit later on. Also, I think that the vision is really based on the very dramatic observations about the number of failures that we see in drugs being submitted to the authorities, and especially in this case, FDA. This is a JAMA publication that is telling us that about 50% of drugs being submitted fails at first cycle review. And more than 50% out of the 50% that failed first cycle review will never be approved. Even more striking is to see why these have been rejected. It's really very alarming to see that in the majority of the cases, well, about the majority, 45%, drugs would never be approved because of data quality and integrity issues. This is about having missing data, data integrity, inconsistent results between trials, between sites, and between endpoints. At the end, we're talking about 23% of submissions out of the one that failed first cycle review that are rejected to data quality and integrity issues. And as I said, I think it's really alarming when you see the number of technologies that we have nowadays that could be supporting us, that could be supporting you in making a better process and limit the risk of submissions. And I think that the scope of today is really to explain how the software can bring support to the risk-based approach, and by combining the two solutions that we have at Oracle and CluePoints. And first of all, I will let Jim explain what is Oracle vision, and then I will move on to the CluePoints vision. Jim, up to you.
Great. Thank you, Francois. So as we worked with CluePoints, we've come a long ways, and I think, as Francois said, our partnership together has evolved. We've been improving what we can do together, and we do see the industry really looking at, by us working together, both with the data and our analytics tools that we have, that really it improves the risk-based monitoring approach. And with that, we'll get started here with my part of the presentation. Oracle itself is really looking to deliver end-to-end value, whether we're optimizing operations, gaining actionable insights, innovating, or even future-proofing your business. Oracle is in it for the long haul. We are working with companies like CluePoints to really advance the capabilities, but also offer you what is really needed in today's environment for running clinical trials. As we look at our risk-based monitoring piece, we've seen this paradigm shift, and whether I see us saying we're growing from infancy, I think we're still young in where we are with risk-based monitoring approaches. We're really trying to improve resource efficiencies, increase the quality of the trial conduct and the data collected, maintain or reduce the study timelines, hopefully reducing those and the overall cost of the studies. And we've been looking at the operational focus KRIs and risk analysis. And this is where we see a lot of companies looking at this. We also see a risk-based monitoring or reduce SDV through technology. And one of the things we try to point out, only about 2.4% of critical data is actually queried on average. So we spend a lot of time querying or figuring out what data queried, but very little of that data is actually queried. We also see drivers for quality focus. We have site and data and increasing safety information coming that needs to be in high quality. We also are streamlining our drug development, getting more drugs to the market to help patients, and we need to advance what technologies we're using within clinical trials. And the R&D pipeline itself, reducing risk for financial investments and making sure how do we cover that cost as we see companies still trying to drive costs 10 to 40% down over the next 3 to 5 years, which is very important, whether that's travel costs, resource costs, or even site time. These are things that the industry is driving, and through risk-based monitoring and reducing the RSDV piece through technology, these are key effects that we're seeing our customers ask for. So CROs and sponsors have invested millions in implementing RSDV and risk-based monitoring. They've been standardizing data and processes, creating KRIs that are very operational focused. Again, still trying to figure out what's the right way to go and what's the wrong way to go. A lot of companies look at these KRIs, which I think there's a lot more to learn from them. Recently, we've seen Translator release a large quantity more of KRIs that should be for risk-based monitoring. And it's important to see we are learning, and that's the good thing, and we do want to continue this change as it moves forward. We also see the introduction of new business process and change management, whether that's introducing business intelligence tools on top of it, but this is a major shift in business process. And as a lot of companies implement this, whether it's CROs or pharmas, the business processes have to change along with it. And we've also been seeing, integrating systems and data. It is more of a platform approach, and that's something, as I show you in the next couple of slides, it is about how we bring data from multiple systems together. How do we look at everything that we're doing in a clinical trial from a technology point of view and advance our capabilities in risk-based monitoring. We also see the focus on data quality algorithms and not just operational data. And this new focus is really what we see CluePoints providing that additional piece with their operational data. It really is bringing that together. We also see where business process management tools will sit on top of that and really combine the two pieces together. And then we also see a next focus with artificial intelligence. So as we move forward, I think we're making great progress now, but I think with all this information and all this data, we are going to get smarter and work smarter in working with this data. So we've seen the industry initiatives, especially as Francois had mentioned earlier. There's the regulatory drivers, the guidances, the MHRA. We've seen the clinical trial transformation initiative with the QDB, and these really go hand in hand with quality by design. There's a lot of this is ensuring we have the quality in the data, and really being able to apply that. And so there really is a tight, I call it a tight grip with risk-based monitoring. And then of course the Transcelerate pieces that have been being pushed out. A lot of companies are following these. Additional focus on critical processes, risk indicators through the trial, early and ongoing risk management, and again the quality by design. But again, we see additional KRIs coming out from Transcelerate, which I think are key. We're beginning to see a stronger, more capable KRIs that really help us to implement risk-based monitoring. When Oracle looks at risk-based monitoring, we look at it in the stages. We know this just isn't pulling the data and looking at it within an EDC system. There's planning that goes in it from the beginning. How do you identify, plan, and prioritize those? How do you look at the risk factors that are specific for that product, that program, or protocol? From a design point of view, how do we define the eligibility criteria, the efficacy, safety? How does that all come together for inclusion in the ECRF, as well as the other pieces as we're designing the protocol for risk-based monitoring? Or designing your CRF. In the execution, again, you want clear oversight as we're moving through that, parameters leading up to the study endpoints, level monitoring plan, directions, how do we evaluate fraud, looking at the risk assessments, and really defining the success for a focused risk mitigation strategy. And this includes looking at the patient data, and this is why we feel our partnership is very strong. Analysis-wise, once you have that data, how do you look at it? How often do you look at it? When do you react to it? And then also, how do you really disclose that at the end? The regulators want to be able to say, okay, if you've implemented risk-based monitoring, what did you do? What data did you disclose? Why did you pick those? And really have that analysis to show what you've done over the life of a trial or a protocol or a program back into risk-based monitoring. When Oracle, again, looks at it, we are bringing a platform approach. It is bringing data from multiple systems to support partial STV, risk-based monitoring, from the RAC assessments, KRIs, dashboards, alerts, safety information, information from CluePoints, other third-party systems, IoT, EDC. Again, it's bringing this data all together in a place so that from an analytics point of view, you can look at it holistically, and you can react to it, and you can record what's being done with that data. So it's a very important piece as we look at a risk-based monitoring platform from a technology perspective. Again, as I mentioned before, it's also important to look at the process, the change management, the other pieces around the process flow, And when do you look at these? When do you build these in from a study design point of view and execution? Again, you know, the quality by design during the study planning, aligning the systems and configuration with quality plans during the study design phases. Having the systems work together to support risk-based monitoring during the execution, again, in the reportable actions and final reporting at the end. So there is a process flow that needs to be looked at. It isn't just something you want to try to overlay on top of your current EDC process or simplify it to that area. You really need to look at it holistically. Again, this second diagram that I'm showing is where we look at it. Again, it's how do you take the data from different systems and how do you move it to risk-based monitoring dashboards and make it simple and easy for the study team to be able to perform the risk-based monitoring activities and understand what's going on at each of their investigator sites. So again, this partnership, we look at the dashboards between CluePoints and ours. We are combining our data together. We're combining our dashboards together, making them more accessible to our customers themselves, and really simplifying it so that the CluePoints and Oracle relationship in pieces are already set up, and that there isn't anything extra that you have to do. And we've been working hard to define those, implement those, and make sure that we have more of a platform approach together when companies want to work with Oracle and CluePoints. So in summary, again, I said it, the risk-based monitoring is still young. Regulatory agencies are really key supporters of that. We've seen that. I think everybody's fully aware of that at this time. Investments in risk-based monitoring will continue. Standardization of data is key to this. And I think companies who want to do risk-based monitoring really have to understand their standards and understand how do they bring them together. We really need to look at how do we simplify setting up of systems so that they work around risk-based monitoring, and that's part of the key design of even the next generation systems that will be coming out, that they're built into these systems, and that the interaction with what tools CluePoints have added are very simple and can be added and really integrated with other systems that are available. The key stages of planning, design, execution, analysis, and disclosure, it isn't just about looking at the data. You have to plan for it, design, and all the way through the disclosure and analysis, understand what you're going to do and how you're going to prove that the risk-based monitoring approach you took was right for that study program. Process and change management investments, again, implementing the processes are an important thing. We see companies still working through that, understanding what they need to do. We see new and changing roles. Again, there's a new role in what we see from a data management or a CRA role or a combined role that really starts to see how do they look at data. It is from the data that's there, we're trying to simplify that through dashboards, but there are drill downs and pieces that go there, and we're seeing a new type of integrated CRA and data management role. And it's real-time and historical data access is key. Again, you want that data to come in quick. You want the data to be analyzed and available, especially in operational data, to see where you are, and also with the patient data, so that you can understand and see the risk-based model, the risks that are available just to the patient data, which is what you're going to see more during Francois' presentation. The platform approach is required. We are bringing different types of data together. Warehousing is going to become a more and more important piece to accessing data in things like CluePoints, being able to access that data in one place and simplifying that moving forward. And again, looking at the integration between operation and clinical study for risk-based monitoring really does provide a more comprehensive approach. Both of them have their advantages, and both of them will continue to move forward. And we think that what CluePoints has is still very unique, and their position in the market is something that we don't see out there from any other providers today. With that, I will move to poll question 1.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Jim. That was fantastic. We do have a first of 2 polling questions appearing on audience members' screens right now. And you can vote on these questions in real time by clicking on your screen, and I encourage you to do so. The first question we have for you, where do you see KRIs and data quality oversight playing the greatest role? And your options available are for overall data quality oversight in late phase studies, as an operational driver for risk-based monitoring, another option there, as a stamp of data quality at the end of the study, another option, as a tool to ensure third-party quality oversight, and your fifth and final option there as an insurance policy for clinical studies. All right, you can get your last votes in now because I'm going to be closing this polling question. And let's take a look at the results that should be appearing on your screen right now. 69% of you said as an operational driver for risk-based monitoring, and 12% of you said for overall data quality oversight in late phase studies. Another 12% said a tool to ensure third-party quality oversight, and 3% said as a stamp of data quality, and another 3% said an insurance policy. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation back over to Francois Torche. Francois.
Thank you, Andrew. Very interesting poll and very interesting answer to the poll about operational driver. I think that it's fair to say that most people today are really looking at RBM and how to operationalize RBM. I think the next logical step, once it will be operationalized, will be actually to focus on data quality and quality in general. But that's a very interesting poll. Thank you, everyone. So what I want to do now is really to look at those guidances, those references that we have, and namely we have FDA guidance and more recently the ICH E6 guidance. And interestingly, there is something in common in those different papers, and that's the role of statistics. I'm not going to read those statements. I'm just going to take some keywords that I think are very interesting because they go exactly in the direction of what CluePoints is trying to achieve, which is having a statistical approach, guiding site visits, having some central statistical checks. That's for FDA guidance, and actually in that FDA guidance we have our papers being referenced multiple times, and I really want to insist on the fact that the first paper that we published was back in 1999. So it's not like it's something we've been working on the last 2 years. This is something we've been working for more than 15 years, and yeah, actually 16 times flies. And then you have the more recent addendum to ICH E6, which goes exactly in the same direction, and actually it's even more specific. It's about complementing and reducing on-site monitoring visits. It's about identifying missing data, inconsistent data, data outliers, lack of variability, protocol deviations. It's about trying to identify potential data manipulations. It's about using statistical analyses to look at the consistency of data across sites. That last one is very important, across sites. And as I said, this is exactly what central statistical monitoring is all about. And since we invented the terminology, I think that we can give it a definition, which is interrogate all the clinical data and the key operational data to find anomalies, discrepancies that remain undetected using traditional techniques. And that is really looking at CRF data, lab data, ECG data, ePro data, CTMS data, and any data source which is patient-related or site-related. Statistics is usually scaring people, but actually it's very simple. And I would explain you what it is all about by using a very simple example and that graph. So that graph is actually, if I was asking you if there is anything atypical that you see on that graph, you might say that this item is an outlier. And now I'm going to tell you that this is about the trial. This is about the number of serious adverse events in the trial. And so each plot corresponds to one center. And this plot, which is the outlier, is actually showing us that this site has a higher number of serious adverse events compared to the other centers. That's really the very important piece to understand. It's comparing one site against the others. And the role of statistics is to measure how atypical a center is compared to the others. So we make an objective assessment, an objective measurement of that difference, and we give it a score between 0 and 10, pretty much like the Richter scale. 0 means it's really close to the other side, sites, and 10 means it's really atypical compared to the other sites. And based on that score, we can easily rank the sites related to the number of serious adverse events in this example. So if we summarize what we see on that screen, on that graph, we have one center which is the outlier, the center 1 to 3. ranked number 1. The score is 7.2. The number of serious adverse events per patient observed in this center is 3, and the number of serious adverse events per patient expected across all the centers is 0.3. Those values are not subjective. They are not based on thresholds defined by the users. They are based on what has been observed in your database. So this is really a very objective assessment. And that assessment was made on serious adverse events, on the number of occurrences, on sites. But the same process can actually be applied to many different endpoints: BMI, blood pressure, Q2 interval, assessment date, or some operational data like protocol deviations, queries, recruitment rates. We can, of course, apply a very simple statistical method, which is counting number of observations, but we can also look at missing data, variability across different visits within each patient, variability between the patients, average values. And then we have, of course, the dimension of the sites. We can compare one site against the others, but we can also compare regions, countries, patients. There is no limit to the dimensions you can look at. But of course, the more dimensions you will include and the more tests you will be performing, the more scores you will have. So you can end up with a very large matrix of scores. And therefore, the second piece of the product, the second piece of the process in the Smart Engine is to compute a score by site, by country, by patient. So we can identify where are the outliers, where are the atypical centers, where are the atypical countries, where are the atypical patients. And by looking those different tools, the site scoring, the extreme scores, and the key risk indicators, all based on the same statistical technologies, you can have your central review team reviewing each of those items at a regular interval. So for KRIs, typically we're looking at every week or every 2 weeks. For an extreme score, for a targeted approach, we'll have a review every 4 weeks. For site scoring, for the full data quality assessment, we're more considering something every 2 months, 3 months. And then if you have very clear rules to identify where are the outliers, then you can start building signals. And those signals will be reviewed by the study team later on. So the central review team, typically data analysts from data management, biostatistics, will be pre-digesting those information and generate signals that will be categorized in study conduct versus data quality. Study conduct, typically we're talking about CRF completion, protocol deviations, number and delay in queries. Those are more focused on operational activities. And then we have the data quality, atypical patients, atypical populations, atypical measurements. Those are more data focused. And those will be addressed by data management and biostatisticians in priority. The study team, the data surveillance committee, is in charge of reviewing the signals and mitigate the signals. Not all signals are issues. Actually, a small proportion of the signals will be confirmed as being issues. So we have to categorize the signals, and we created 3 categories. One is green. Green means that there is no further action required. This is a signal, yes, but this is not an issue. Yellow is, we're not sure yet. We have to keep an eye on this signal, and at a later step, at the next assessment, we'll be reviewing if things are getting better or things are getting worse. And then you have the signal review and action required, for which you need to take action. And then you will be defining those actions, and you will be categorizing those actions between central and local actions. Central, query, site contact, remote monitoring. Local, site visits, site audits. Once you've done this whole process, and once you started collecting all these information, it means that you can easily identify the percentage of sites that are flagged as being at risk, as opposed to those that are not considered at risk and for which you may want to reduce the monitoring visits. And therefore, you have really 2 categories, and you can start looking at, as Jim suggested, we have, for those that are considered at risk, we have to mitigate the risk, we have to take actions, and we have to follow up. We have to document what has been decided. And I also want to mention that for the sites not being at risk, it doesn't mean that there is no monitoring activities at all, because there is a number of activities not based on the risk, like site initiation visits, compliance review, and trainings that will be required anyway. So it's not like we are completely ignoring monitoring visits, but we're reducing the number of monitoring visits for those sites. And then Interestingly, Jim made the comments about machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is what we're working on now at CluePoints, because we want to, based on the experience that we collected in the platform, by study, by program, by sponsor, across multiple sponsors, we can start building metrics, the operational dashboard, that will help study teams to make plannings, to make site selections, to estimate cost savings. And this is really something that is key to us, to have that machine learning techniques in place to improve the user experience and facilitate the review and the decision process. Now, if we talk about the CluePoints software development principles, it's very simple. It's based on the user experience. We really want to make that user experience as simple as possible, as rapid as possible, using the newest technologies and being agile. We want to be lean. We're developing only what makes sense to our customers. So all the development backlog activities that we have are all based on the feedback we got from the users. We develop something, usually quite rapidly. We have iterations of 2 or 3 weeks. We have one release every quarter, but this is all based on the feedback collected by the users. The last very important piece to us is the integration. We are very open. We want to integrate with as many solutions, as many technical solutions as possible. And the way to do that for us is to expose all the features that we have in the application using an API. So everything can be accessed by any application worldwide, wherever they are located. They can access the software as service and get access to these information. How does it translate into the user experience? Our latest addition is the RAC tool. Again, this has been defined by Transcelerate. We have actually here what you see is a risk assessment, which is based on the categories defined by Transcelerate. For each category that you see on the left side, on the right side, you have the list of questions. You have all the fields that were defined by Transcelerate. Everything can be customized. You can create your own categories. You can change the weight of each category. You can create your own questions. You can delete questions if you want to. And at the end, what you have to do for each of those questions is to make an assessment. And we try, again, to make it, I'm not going to say fun, but I'm going to say to facilitate and see the evolution of the process by having those graphical elements to make the assessment between low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Once you completed all the questions, you have a score at the category level. And the category level score is actually based on all the answer you provided, but it can be overwritten. Then, once you made the whole risk assessments, the next logical step is to mitigate the risks that were identified. And yet again, for each of the risks, you will have the ability to define a free text action, as we call it, which can be, for example, providing additional trainings to the site, or decide that the monitoring plan should be adapted. Well, I would say any activity, any action which is not related to a key risk indicator, or you can define key risk indicators. And as part of this process, you will have to define what are the thresholds, what are the computation rules, what is the description of the KRIs. And what you've done through the whole process of mitigation, then you get a list of KRIs, which is ready to be set up in the environment, which is for us the next step in the platform, where you will have here on the left side the different items, the different indicators that should be defined. Again, we see the label, we see the data source, where do we take the information. We have the expected value, which is computed by the system based on the amount of data that we have at the time we do the setup. So we can already tell you that for the number of adverse events by patient visit, in that specific study, we're expecting to have 0.72 adverse events by patient visit. And there, you can then define the threshold, the subjective threshold, the threshold defined by the users, where, for example, in this case, we're saying more than 2 adverse events by patient visit is a yellow flag, more than 4 is a red flag. But you also have the ability to define the scores, and you can see that the scores remain the same. The scores are the scores given by the system. This is a more systematic approach and more objective approach. At the end, you have a dashboard which looks pretty much, I think that you're all familiar with the red dots, yellow dots, and green dots, where you can actually select one item and investigate further. Interestingly, the way that our users are using the KRIs is by looking at both the score given by the system and the score based on the threshold defined by the user. And I have a very interesting example here, where this line here, the 27608 in Germany, with 2 patients, if we look at the score and the threshold defined by the user, we see that it's a red dot. And that's because there is 4 adverse events by patient visit. But actually, the system is also telling us that compared to the other sites, this site is not that atypical with a score of 1.4, which remains in the green zone. So at the end, you may wonder if your thresholds are correctly set, or if you have more serious adverse or more adverse events per patient than anticipated, in more sites than what you anticipated. So having both, it really helps you to either redefine your thresholds and maybe more conservative, or maybe take some more corrective actions about what should be done across all the sites. But yet again, this is really one aspect of the central statistical methodology. If you really want to apply central statistical monitoring, it's just about computing everything on everything, which is what you can do by having a more targeted data quality assessment, where I focused on 6 domains here. And for those 6 domains, I'm going to look at all the red dots. All these dots correspond to different sites and different items. In this example, my exposure data set, if I click on one item which is red, I will see that my dose per administration, the within patient variability, so looking across different visits per patient, I have a much lower variability than expected. Do I want to take an action on that or not? This is up to the study team to decide. And then you have the overall data quality assessment, which is really looking at everything and computing a score by site, by country, or by patient. This bubble plot that you see at the top is actually representing different sites, different countries. The size of the bubble corresponds to the number of patients at those countries. And we identify here 3 sites that are potentially at risk. After you've been through the risk assessment and the signals review, then you have to make actions. And this is the role of the new tracking system, which is going to be released in Q1, where you will have the list of signals that were pre-digested by the central team, and then you will have to make decisions about either it's a signal okay to check or action required. And everything is documented. You can make comments, you can add history, and this is where we see the integration with CTMS, Siebel, where when you decide to create actions, for example, those actions will be re-injected automatically in the CTMS Siebel. As you mitigate those risks, we may also, from here, look at the queries that are ongoing, or is there any action which is already defined into the CTMS? You understand that this is more than just fraud detection. CSM is really about the data quality oversight. This is about having both clinical and operational data being reviewed on a regular basis. And we can detect any kind of issues like staff trainings, misunderstanding of protocol, faulty measuring devices, sloppiness, laziness that some people might call fraud, or atypical population. At the end, this is really about supporting the monitoring activities. This is really about having a more focused SDV, if any, and then making sure that your data are still 100% verified. That's really the goal, and put that data quality stamp on the study. This is about knowledge. This is really about knowledge and how fast you get access to that knowledge. The feedback that I have from our users is really that they're really amazed by the level of knowledge we get in just a matter of a couple of weeks or 3 weeks. And this is because, again, the simplicity of the tool makes it possible to review at a glance a number of different elements that you would have that would be very difficult to assess using Excel documents or any other solution. Andrew, back to you for the second question.
Great. Thank you very much, Francois. We do have the second and final polling question on audience members' screens right now. And again, you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. I encourage you to do so. This time, the question is, how far along is your company in using risk-based monitoring? Your options are, you're still evaluating the various approaches. You're currently conducting an assessment of vendors. Third option there, you've piloted RBM in less than 5 studies, or maybe you've bought into RBM and planning how to use it in most studies. Or your final option there, you're fully embracing RBM and you're using it in most late-phase studies. How far along is your company in using risk-based monitoring? Let's take a look at the results. You can get your last clicks in now because we'll be taking a look at the results right now. And there we have it, pretty spread across the board there. The most popular answer, 28% of you have bought into RBM and are planning how to use it in most studies. 22% of you are still evaluating the various approaches. 19% of you have fully embraced RBM, and 13% are currently conducting an assessment of vendors. And with that, Francois, I'll hand the mic back to you.
Thank you. Again, very interesting question and very interesting answers, and that confirms what we've seen, and maybe Jim will comment on that afterwards, but we see that more and more people are really getting interested about RBM and are really implementing RBM. Just a couple of years ago, if we're asking the same questions, I'm pretty sure that no more than 25 to 30% will have answered that they have at least something going on. Now we see that we have more than 55%, so obviously it goes in the right direction. Thank you. So one last slide, which is, I guess, a slide that might be of interest for some of you about the integration between Oracle and CluePoints. So we've been working with our Oracle colleagues on trying to identify where are the elements that should be integrated in each of our solutions. On the left side, you have some of the elements part of the Oracle Life Science Suite that we believe might be of interest to be integrated with CluePoints. On the right side, you have our different components, namely you have, of course, the authentication system, but KRIs indicators and data quality oversight, the signal tracker, and more recently the RACs. On the left side, you have the authentication system again. You have Inform, LSH, DMW, you have CDA, and you have CTMS Siebel. So where did we start? We started by the data, getting access to the data. It sounds like very logical first step so that we can get access to the data, clinical data, operational data, process this data in the statistical engine, and provide results to the customers. So we started with Inform. Inform is in production. We released Inform at the end of last year together with other EDC connectors. And now we're working on the LSH DMW connector, which is going to be released, I would say Q1, at the end of Q1, maybe Q2 2016. I think that we're in good shape for Q1. Let's take some safety net and say that it could be Q2. We're also working on the CTMS Siebel integration. Again, two rows. There is one which goes, we feed the system, our system, CluePoint system, with CTMS information, but we also re-inject those data into CTMS. As I said, for the action tracking system, there should be one master and one slave. It's very clear that Oracle will own the master, and we will have a replication of the actions into CluePoints. But again, as I explained, as you create a signal or as you create an action within CluePoint signal action tracker, it will automatically be created into CTMS Siebel, and from that point in time, CTMS Siebel will have the end on the action. For the KRIs indicators and the data quality oversight, what we plan to do, it's still now, I would say, in development. We're discussing about how to best do it, is to re-inject the scores to CDA. So we try to have a two bi-direction communication between CDA and the KRIs indicators and data quality oversight. The last piece is the authentication system, which is, I think, will result from the integration we do with CTMS Siebel. So our objective is really to have everything completed by the end of the year. And I think, as Jim mentioned, that it really depends on what makes sense to our customers. We have a number of customers now we're discussing with that are really interested about those different integrations, and they will decide which one should be the priorities. And that is the end of this presentation, and I thank you all very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Francois. Also, thank you to Jim for his portion of the presentation. And at this point, I would like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions and comments in right now using that questions window for this, which is, of course, the Q&A portion of the webinar. And gentlemen, I've already received quite a number of questions here already, so let's get started with our first question. That is for Francois. When is the ideal time to start using the CluePoints analytics?
Aha, good one. So I guess you can start using the CluePoints analytics quite rapidly in the study. Now it depends on what we call CluePoints analytics. When it comes to KRIs, key risk indicators, you can start using it right away. I think that there is no need for having any data, especially if we focus on the values, the thresholds defined by the users. Now, if we talk about the statistics, then of course we need to have some volume of data. So for a typical targeted data quality assessment or overall data quality assessments, we're saying that we can start computing statistics as soon as we have something around 50 patients and we have at least 10 sites. Of course, if we're talking about the patient's assessment, so we're not computing scores but patients, then we can start maybe around, I would say, 30 to 40 patients.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for that. Now this next question goes to Jim. Why is it in the interest of large CROs to do this unless sponsors are demanding it? It means they have to downsize significantly if the cost reduction is real.
Yeah, and I think I will say that the CROs are really getting pushed by the farmers. I think initially it was looked at as a huge cost savings is the way it was looked at. But I think as companies are beginning to grow in this, again, we heard a lot about that. It's coming to quality, and I think that's the thing. It is going to improve quality. It is setting a lot more drivers to improve the quality of the studies, which improves the efficiencies to the studies, which, yes, it does reduce the amount of what I call site visits and getting out to sites. Of course, CROs will still need to go to sites. It isn't just looking at STV. There's a lot of other things that occur, but it does reduce it. But I also see the farmers saying, well, as I look at this, I will be running more trials. And as they reduce the cost for a clinical trial or their programs, they can also start to run more trials. So I think what we're going to see is shifts. It also means that other resources are looking at the data and interpreting the data. So it's a shift in the mindset of what people are doing. They may not be going to sites, but they're still reviewing and looking at data and having to call sites or having to look at them. Yes, I think it has a good reduction in cost and time on sites, but I also see that other farmers are now saying I can expand the number of studies that I can run, which means, yes, there'll be additional studies and additional project management, additional monitoring that will occur as we move forward. And I think we're starting to see that now. I think the CROs are seeing that shift and are actually making those shifts now as the industry is really, I would say almost, I know I heard Francois say a number of 60–70% of the companies are doing risk-based monitoring, but I would say out of the larger top 100 pharma, probably 90 to 100% of them are all doing risk-based monitoring now.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Jim. This next question, perhaps both can go to both of you if you feel that's appropriate. How do you define de-risking a study?
Jim, you want to go first?
I can go first. Thanks, Francois. So when you de-risk a study, I think, as I said before, you plan for risk. You plan ahead. It is quality by design. I see it de-risking as planning for things that can go wrong during the study and things that aren't going to improve, that will cause you risk later in the study. And when I look at risk-based monitoring, and I really should look at it a different way, is when I say that, it really is planning for a risk, looking for them, identifying them, so that they don't become bigger risks, that you can, basically as a risk comes up, that you can find it, identify it, and correct it during the trial. Francois?
Well, I think, de-risking a study is really about, first, as you just said, it's really about first making the assessment before you study and try to make the best quality by design to ensure that we're limiting the risk and we're really having a very focused approach on what data should be collected. And then de-risking the study at a later stage is about, in my opinion, having the KRIs, of course, but also having the targeted and the overall data quality assessment. It's only when you have all these elements that you're making sure that you are covered on your risks.
Right, excellent. Well, thank you for that. Our next question here, with the new tracking system in CluePoints, how are issues tracked and how can they be assigned to a resource monitored and an outcome documented and issue closed out? So it sounds like probably a question for you, Francois.
Oh, actually, I think it's a question for both. If we talk about the integration with Oracle, so within our system, as you create actions, and I think it's the same for CTMS Siebel, by the way, as you create actions, of course, you have to assign to someone, you have to assign a due date, you have to assign a description, you can change the status of the action, you have ways of reviewing what are the pending actions, the open actions, the new actions, and then within CTMS, well, as we'll be rejecting those actions within the CTMS, you will have the ability to access those within the CTMS. Do you want to make a comment on that, Jim?
Yeah, I think actions is an important thing. They need to be recorded. They need to be recorded in a system. I think we're understanding who responds to those actions and things. I think right now, I think that's the most important thing is identifying those roles as you develop that, what the responses are going to be from the CRA. And then I think as we move forward, and you heard me mention that, business process BPM tools are being put on top of this from many companies to help with that. And then I think we'll also see artificial intelligence start to even respond to that and actually automate a lot of this. I don't think that's in the next 3 years, but out to 5 or 10 years, we'll see that.
Well, Jim, let me jump in on this because this is actually something we're working on right now. So our objective is really to apply machine learning techniques to make it possible for the users to look at the actions that have been taken in the past, and so that the system can suggest, here's what you've done in the past, here's what we suggest you to do now. And the same is true for the signals. So maybe 2 or 3 years, I think that will be there before.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you both for that. Our next question here, how do you prepare and train an internal team for the appropriate setup and development of the required skills?
I can start with that, Francois, and then go from there. From a team training point of view, we see that a lot. And I think as I've been out with customers and Francois has been out, we're seeing this is change management. And again, your process has to be defined, and as you're implementing it, yes, you can do an overall training and change your process and how this is going to look, but each team needs to be trained on each study. And I think that's the monitoring plan, having the risk-based monitoring in there, and what people are going to do and how they're going to react to it. Each of those by study needs to be implemented, and I think that's, again, as I said, the planning phase, identification phase, and then the design, and then the duration phase. All those are built upon on a what I call a study or program specific basis, so that the team is trained in it. But there's the overall training of how you're changing your process and simplifying it around risk-based monitoring.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Jim. Moving to our next question here. Are there case studies of companies that have implemented RBM, and what functions were involved? How were monitoring teams managed? What were the time, cost, and savings, and lessons learned, etc.?
So on our end, we've conducted the first analysis about 3 years ago. Since then, we've been processing about 50 to 60 trials by now. So usually the people that are involved in the review of the signals are, I think it's a multidisciplinary exercise, but mainly the signals are prepared by data management and biostatistics, and then they're reviewed by, of course, physicians, monitors, study managers, and then actions are taken either by data management or by monitors. This is what we see more often. In terms of case studies, we've been running a number of pilots. I think it's fair to say that until now, we have limited feedback about cost savings. I think it's too new. Those pilots are running sometimes for years. And so before we can actually make a clear assessment about what are the cost savings, it's going to take time. But I don't know what's your opinion on this, Jim.
No, and I would agree with those. I think, I have seen published case studies. There's different ones out there. I'll answer the other part of that question. I think what Francois is saying is spot on. I think there are case studies at least published once or twice a year by certain companies. I'm not sure how many of them have been public that I've seen, but I've seen different ones from different companies. All of them point to the improvement in the learning. They are seeing basically that they're able to reduce the cost and reduce time on site, but they still believe there's other quality drivers that need to be learned, and I think this is where those are coming in. And I'm not sure if CluePoints, have you published any case studies yet on your side, Francois? Okay.
Well, we have of course a few case studies about the kind of problems we detected. We also have a case study which is I think about to be published, where we summarized out of the last 20 or 25 studies we analyzed where the most critical findings were. But in terms of cost savings, we don't have any.
Great. Well, thank you both for that. We'll look forward to that publication. Moving to another question here. This audience member writes, for a layman, how would you differentiate between the insights from KRIs and what is being done in central statistical monitoring? Would we need to have both? Couldn't we implement central statistical monitoring as more KRIs?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Well, let me explain why I think it's impossible. So say that you build a dashboard with 10 or 15 indicators. That's something that from a human standpoint you can easily review. Say that you're going to process 50 variables, and for each of those you're going to have something like 5 or 6 statistical tests. It means that your 50 indicators are becoming 300 or 600 indicators. And then it becomes impossible from a human standpoint to review those. So what we could do, and what we plan to do with Oracle in CDA, is that the overall score that will have been computed by site will be reinjected among the KRIs present in CDA. So there will be one additional column, which is going to be the risk assessment computed by the system. In my opinion, that's not enough. A score given at the site level can actually be resulting from many different reasons that are good reasons. Say that you have a site where you have a very atypical population, the score is going to be very high, but you have a good reason for this, which is why you still need to review the signals and filter the signals, and therefore you need both. That's really my message, obviously. But I think that if you just focus on 15 key risk indicators, there is a great chance that you're going to miss something out of all the 300 variables or 300 endpoints you're going to collect in your ECRF. That's my point of view.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we'll squeeze in one last question here, and that's directed to Francois. To implement RBM and centralized statistical monitoring, does this require a review and change of processes from monitoring and data monitoring and biostatistical teams? What do you think about the role and responsibilities of CRAs, data managers, and biostatistics in this new approach?
Yes, there is a need for changes, that's for sure. If you keep doing what you're doing and you bring an additional layer, which is the central statistical monitoring layer, the overall data quality assessments, the targeted quality assessments, and the review of KRIs, then it's going to be a huge amount of work that comes in addition to what those study teams are doing. If you want to implement RBM, you have to understand that you would have to change the processes. And there are good people, and we are partnering with a number of different organizations who are specialized in supporting the study teams and the sponsors to update and change their processes. The role of the CRA, I think, would be a more central role. The role of data management and biostatistics, I think, is going to be, as I explained, about the data analysis position, about pre-digesting what makes sense and what should be reported to the study team. So, of course, they will play a key role in that new position.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. Looks like we have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If you do have any further questions, however, you can direct them to Francois or Jim via the email addresses showing on your screen right now. And if we weren't able to attend to your questions today, the team at CluePoints may try to follow up with you via email after the webinar. Thank you everyone for participating in today's conference. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. And if you'd like a PDF copy of the slides, please note the email at the very bottom of your screen. That's contact@cluepoints.com. You can email them to get a PDF copy of the slides. That might be very helpful for everyone. Now a survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it'll help us improve our further webinars. And I'll be passing forward you a link in the chat box. You can use that to thank our speakers for today. And I encourage you to do so. You can do that via Twitter using that link that'll appear very shortly in your chat box. Thanks to our speakers, Francois Torsch and Jim Streeter. We hope that you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.